Fantastic. Well, it's great to be here tonight, everyone. I was really glad to get this invitation to come and speak with you all tonight. I've heard great things about Shy Hack Night and happy that I can join from New York City, where I'm currently based. So tonight we'll be talking about the Public Sector Job Board, how it got started, where it is today, but also go into what it's like to work in government, and what you may need to know if it's something that is of interest to you. So first, a little bit about myself, the things that I think you need to know. So my name is Rebecca Heywood, she, her pronouns. And I started the Public Sector Job Board as a side project from my day job with US Digital Response, which some of you may know about. I'm also consider myself a public servant. I've worked with the City of New York. I've worked with the MTA, the transit agency here in New York City, and with the MBTA in Boston. And it's really shaped a lot of my professional career and my perspective on the world. I would consider myself a government operations nerd, very into kind of the back office functions of how government works and what it takes to deliver services to people on a day in, day out basis. So things from civil service, the kind of backbone of government hiring and the modernization of those systems, procurement, fleet, technology, and a lot more. And then something else that I think often comes across in my work is that I'm an optimist, and I'm a strong believer that by bringing together people who have worked in government in the past, who have been dedicated public servants, those who are thinking about it for the first time, we can make government work better together. And it's a really important part of our civic duty. So with that, I'll start by talking about the job board itself, how it came to be, and then go into some of the other things. Throughout this, I will welcome, you'll see questions, ideas, things like that. This is very much a work in progress, and I love hearing from folks about how things are helpful and what else may be more helpful. So with that, the timeline of Public Sector Job Board really started back at the end of 2019. Tech layoffs were ramping up. There was a lot of chatter on the internet, on LinkedIn, and other things that folks were losing their jobs. They were looking for new roles. There were job posts being thrown around, but none of them were in government. I knew from my world that governments were hiring and they were hiring technologists, but it wasn't out in the open. And so I started kind of just informal posts about the open roles I was seeing, about the folks I knew who were hiring. And it has taken off from there. Last year, 2023, I transitioned into a formal newsletter, into a formal structure of some type, which I hope many of you have seen before, and also started sharing more than jobs. Some of the things that I'm reading, some of the events and communities that are growing around the civic tech and gov tech space in a little bit of a different form than they have over the last 10 years. It's been great to see across the country the interest in this work. And so I love being able to share these things. And one of the big questions this year is, what does this evolve? Does it continue as the job board as it has been through 2023? Is there something more that would be really helpful to the community? And so that's where some of the ideas and things come in. So I welcome all of those. Um, One of the problems that I was really looking at solving is hearing that not everybody, but a lot of folks were disillusioned with big tech and some of the impact on the world. We saw the challenges and the opportunities and what was happening through the COVID pandemic. And after hiring ramped up, layoffs ramped up not long after as funding changed and priorities changed. Um, and there was a space there that folks were really struggling with. Again, folks were hiring, but government job sites, if you've been on them, can be hard to navigate. The job titles can be hard to navigate. The descriptions are not always as exciting as the actual job would be itself. It doesn't give you a sense of the team or the culture or things like that in a lot of cases. And then the other thing that I've heard from a lot of folks is that it's hard to navigate the hiring process. In a lot of cases, they can look different. There's different lingo and terminology. There's different kind of standards and expectations than things in the private sector or nonprofit space. And so there was a gap there that I was really interested in trying to figure out how to address. So the solution that kind of came up with was this weekly newsletter focused on tech and innovation in government, tech and innovation jobs in government, with three real goals. Thinking about visibility. I picked LinkedIn, and one of the reasons I still love it is that every week I'm hearing from folks and seeing folks who I would never have reached. They wouldn't have found a standalone website, but because it's on this platform where it's easy, it's social for people to share and bring awareness to others. It's taken on kind of a life of its own, which I think, from my perspective, I hope makes it easier for folks to find what they're excited about and looking for. I also, like I said, I'm an optimist. There's a lot of exciting things happening right now in the public sector at the federal level, at state levels, at local levels. And it's not celebrated enough. A lot of the articles and things that come out about it are hidden on, if anyone follows federal tech, gov tech news, state scoop, things like that. They're very niche publications that those of us kind of entrenched in this work follow. But there's a lot more happening out there, and I think it's important to share. And then something else that a lot of folks bring up is just awareness of this is kind of a niche internal thing in some ways, but folks have given me a lot of feedback that the awareness of job titles and salary ranges and things like that across jurisdictions are not something they've historically had great access to. And it's really helped folks bring awareness to who's doing hiring well, who's creating exciting job descriptions, what are they paying their staff? And it helps build the case for creating better jobs for technologists in government. Um, a few stats just on where we're at. I've been incredibly surprised at how this community has grown. We're at 11,000 subscribers and folks who follow the work so far. 1,200 government agencies have had, or more, this was a rough number, have had jobs listed. That's a lot of hiring. There's over 90,000 governmental entities in the US, so we have a long way to go, but 1,200 so far. Folks are reaching out. Governments are proactively sharing their jobs. We've had over 70 so far who have reached out. And I've heard about at least, and I hope that there's more, 5 folks who have found their jobs through the job board, who found something that they wouldn't have known about otherwise. And that's really one of the goals, in addition to awareness, is helping governments place great folks in jobs and helping folks looking for jobs find the right fit for them. I've gotten a lot of questions over the last year or so on how it works. It's nothing too crazy. I personally, my background's actually in transportation engineering is how I came into government. I wouldn't call myself uh, not a software engineer or anything like that. So I haven't done a lot of work on that side of things. It's really, I keep an eye out on what's interesting, what's happening in the community, what am I reading, what are the things people are sharing throughout every week, hearing from folks in the civic tech community, whether in government or otherwise, who have heard of those interesting things, who pass them along. And also because there's a lot of folks, this community is still growing. We may be at 11,000, but again, the millions of government workers in the country. The federal government is one of the highest, largest employers in the country. Again, there's a long way to go. So I do some work as well to search for places that haven't been highlighted recently, to see who is doing some of this work. And it is kind of stuck in there in their independent job site, but they have the opportunity to there's an opportunity for a technologist to have a really great impact. And so that all comes into the mostly weekly newsletter. It's really pretty straightforward in a lot of senses, but always thinking about, as it continues to grow, what some other opportunities are. Um, so that's a little bit about kind of the origin of the job board itself. But a big reason why I do this work is because government matters. And so I'll talk a little bit about why some of the reasons I think are the answer to the question, why government, why work in government. One really big thing, there's a lot of problems that matter in the world. Government is working on all of them. Whether you care about racial equity, whether you care about climate change, whether you care about access to public benefits, whether you care about sanitation, there are government employees making the policy that affects that work, building the systems or managing the systems that make cities and states and communities run on a daily basis. And you're really at the heart of what that looks like. Similarly, government, one of the things where government really varies from a lot of private sector work is you're mandated to serve the edge cases. They're not something that you can ignore. They're real people with real experiences who need access to services. And so it becomes really complex a lot of times. And it's hard to figure out how you serve that last 10, 5 to 1%. Because they're people who are eligible for services, whether it's figuring out how you help someone elderly in their who's homebound access certain things, get medical care or other things, or whether it's helping from a transportation perspective. There's so many things, and it makes for really interesting, complex work that has a real impact on people's lives. So both if you care about the impact or you care about the complexity or some combination of both, it's really a unique opportunity to do that. Something else is that we're in this period where government, unfortunately, is kind of behind on what technology looks like. If there's a lot of reasons for that, that's a whole other presentation. But we're at a point in a culture change right now where there's a big movement towards how do we set government up for the digital age? How do we set and make sure that we're able to be responsive in the future, whether it's how government's going to set policy for the safe use of Gen AI, how you're going to incorporate it into service delivery, or whatever comes next. Right now, in the moment, in most of the country, is this opportunity to really set the foundation to improve things now, but also make sure that it doesn't stay as behind in the future. This work can look like a lot of things. I've pulled a couple of cases that I am particularly interested in for things happening across the country and particularly in the Midwest. The city of Chicago is doing a lot of great work where I believe most of you are based. There's a big movement right now that I'll talk about a little later to reorganize the Department of Technology and Innovation, to create a new digital services team, and really think about how traditional IT technology gets pulled together with digital service delivery and how that affects the business. One example is really taking a fresh look at the 311 app, including and building that out as a base for access to other services, like how you apply for building permits, how you pay bills or fines, how you access cultural resources, things like that. But across in some other communities in South Bend, Indiana, just set up their first digital service team. And one of the things that they're focused on initially is also thinking about user testing and how they serve as a resource for doing better user testing or doing user testing at all. This is a new concept for a lot of folks working in government across programs and services. And also being really innovative in how they think about customer service and bringing it under this umbrella of employee experience, user experience, customer experience in a way that's really unique and something that's being led by a lot of their digital service work. Michigan is thinking about how government buys technology. Most technology in government's not built in-house, it's managed externally, though that is starting to shift and is a really important component of that. Michigan's been a leader in that work. Pennsylvania also just started a digital service team who's been working across the state to really think about a number of different online experiences. One that they've recently completed is prior authorization for healthcare claims. So helping streamline that process for folks during a really stressful time. I think a lot of folks are probably aware of the levels of government that are out there, but there's some key distinctions to think about as you're exploring this space. The difference between federal policymaking and state implementation, resource allocation. The federal government gives money to states who often allocate it to local government. So depending on the level of impact and the type of work and programs that you're interested in working at, there's some distinction in terms of where you may want to be doing that work. The federal designs the structure and creates a lot of policy, finds the funding. The state runs some statewide programs like unemployment insurances, but allocates a lot of that federal funding down to local governments passing through the state. Local governments, things on the ground, a lot of public works, business development, and much more. Then there's this kind of fourth category of multi-jurisdictional public authorities, things like transit agencies, housing authorities, things like that. They all play a part. There's also a number of different types of roles that you'll find in government. I've talked a little bit about digital services. It's a big trend right now in government, but they're typically kind of these centralized teams that provide assistance to department and business areas. They run sprints, they run projects. They're not always the final owner of that work in comparison to kind of traditional IT organizations that sometimes have that under their umbrella, but sometimes don't. They do a lot of the hardware, they're running networks, servers, equipment, but also dictating technology policy, which can have a big impact in owning development and some of the services. They're often the kind of owner of some of these things. And then agency roles that are often more focused on business areas or policy specific type work with folks who specialize in some of these areas like housing or transportation or other things. The last thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about before we wrap up is what you may need to know if you're thinking about making a transition into government from any other sector, whether it's private or nonprofit or anything else. I mentioned before there's 90,000 government jurisdictions in the US. That's a lot of options and places to potentially work. And so doing a little bit of research to narrow down your options. What are you most interested in? What level of government? What type of team? Is there a specific policy area? Can really help guide you in where you want to go. Something I also harp on a lot is that you'll often see in government job descriptions this minimum qualifications and kind of nice to have. In government, minimum qualifications often matter a lot. They're based on laws and regulations that dictate kind of the official title of a role that may be different than the business title. They don't always make sense. They sometimes, for some technologist roles, will require you to have a computer science degree, and we all know a lot of folks don't have that. But if that's how they got approval to hire that role, it's worth looking into and just making sure that you're dotting your I's and explicitly listing those out, but also not wasting your time if there's a chance that it may matter. And that's the difference kind of between minimum or preferred qualifications, but they are often, for most jurisdictions, a hard line. Another piece in thinking about applying is timelines can really vary. I know, for instance, New York City is particularly bad in this from my experience, but sometimes it took 6 months from the time someone submitted an application to the time it was accepted. That's outside of the norm, but on average, I think that it's around 3 months. I don't know Chicago specifically, but just being aware of again, the process piece. There's a lot of approvals in place. There's a lot of folks who have to see it. And again, a lot of these processes are not always as automated and things as we may want them to be, to help process the administrative side of it. That being said, though, a lot of higher level roles don't have the same restrictions, so they can sometimes move more quickly. In terms of working in government, just there's a lot there. Again, a different presentation, but a few things to share. One is that you're going to be coming into an environment where some of the folks you work with may have been there for decades. They know the policy, they know the program inside and out. They've seen a lot of mayors come or governors come. They've seen a lot of kind of bright-eyed folks come in. And they may be skeptical. And so building trust and building relationships, government's very much about relationships, can really help you learn about what it's taken to get things done, but also get what you want to do. And so whether it's folks who've been there a long time, whether it's folks that's new, whether it's folks you're in a digital service team and it's IT, whether it's across business areas, just really thinking about it from a relationship perspective can be really helpful. Something else I've mentioned a little bit about procurement and buying technology and things like that. One of the best pieces of advice I got in government is read the budget, and you'll have more power than anybody. Knowing where the money comes from and how it gets spent is going to tell you what really matters, even if it's different than whatever people are saying. If you don't have money for it in government, it's not going to happen. And then, like I said before, a lot of government technology comes through procurement process. It's bought externally, whether it's services or whether it's SaaS or other things. And so knowing how to play that for your favor, and knowing what is happening internally, what's happening externally, and how they interact is going to get you a long way. The last piece is also politics. Part of working in government is you're often working under an executive, and knowing those priorities, knowing how they may shift for career work, for agency work, and how to think about that right moment, aligning the goals that you're trying to do with the right moment, politically can really help you make significant progress. With that, I wanted to end by talking about some of the things that are happening locally in the Chicago area or in the state of Illinois. Because there's a lot happening. The city of Chicago, for instance, I mentioned they're reorganizing their technology department. They don't have a lot listed now, but over the next few months, I would expect that they're going to be hiring up a storm, and really under great leadership of their CTO Nick Lucius, thinking about how the city serves using technology and how they interact with other parts of the city. Definitely something to keep an eye on. State of Illinois as well. They're actually updating their career pages right now, but they should have more up soon. They're also doing a lot of great work in a lot of their business agencies. But also consider things like the county level. Cook County has some interesting roles right now that have an impact on technology and technology strategy. And there's much more. Something else I mentioned, those public authorities. There's a lot of other opportunities. Chicago Public Schools, for instance, is a public authority. They're doing a lot of innovation work on their technology side. They're hiring an executive director. They're hiring managerial levels, security. This is just a short list of what they're doing. And they also pay really well in the region, but also the Chicago Housing Authority, the Board of Elections, the Transit Authority, nearby counties, things like that. These are all kind of opportunities that would be available to folks locally. Similarly, something you can stay in Chicago and work for the federal government as well. I pulled up just some of the things that are happening right now this week at the federal level. A lot of data scientist roles, technical project managers, a really exciting new the AI initiative at the federal level is doing a lot of remote hiring. And then also the USDA, who runs EBT, SNAP, and a number of other things in addition to kind of agriculturally focused programs, is building a new digital service team that's all remote, and they're hiring for their 2 to 4 year positions. They're calling them fellows right now, which is a really exciting opportunity. Similarly, there's some in-person opportunities in Illinois at the federal level that are worth looking at too. So there's a ton happening, and I would encourage folks who are interested in it to take advantage. Um, with that, that is my wrap up. I'd love to hear from folks about questions that you have about the process or about what it's like, anything like that. I'd also love if there's things that are particularly helpful. Love to hear about that too. So I will leave it there and open it up for questions, Cameron.
All right. Thank you, Rebecca. Covered a lot of ground there, and I learned a lot. And I know folks have questions. So, for folks watching the live stream, please share your questions through the YouTube chat, and we'll ask them here. We've got the first few queued up, so I'll get us started. The first question that we have is, do you have advice for thinking about pay? That seems like a common concern for people thinking about moving into public sector.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's a real thing. I think one of the things that you see in government roles is unless you're at the executive level, you're probably not going to top out over 200K, I would say, in most places. But you also, I mean, government benefits, both covered health insurance and retirement plans and things like that, are not something to discount. You're not going to have the same kind of situation around bonuses and things like that. It's kind of what gets laid out at the beginning, is what gets laid out, but there are often you can ask about kind of how salary increases, promotions and things like that work. There's typically a process in place. Though I do find a lot of folks kind of move up in government by finding a new role, even in the same jurisdiction. I know that was my case as well. There's not always a path, but you can often move around within a pretty small space. I think in terms of pay, it's really a question of what that looks like for you and for your family, for your situation. Um, it's a real question, but I do think we're seeing a lot of competitive opportunities right now, particularly compared to kind of smaller tech companies or compared to other public impact type sectors. Government is in a lot of places is doing a better job of working to keep up, and hopefully that continues to change over time.
All right, thank you. Looking at the next question. Um, Obviously, it varies per jurisdiction, but is there a good place to look for those without the computer science degree? That seems to be listed as a minimum requirement for every Fed job I've looked at.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it really, part of it does vary a little bit by jurisdiction. There's also a big movement now. We're starting to see more product roles or UX roles, design roles, technical project manager roles, things like that, in government. And I think also starting to look at some of those. One of the things that comes up, because teams are often pretty lean, you're wearing a number of hats. And so if you are a software engineer, but you have an interest in another space, it may be an opportunity to kind of figure out like the way in the door may be a slightly kind of adjacent role where you still may have the opportunity to do some of that work. So that's something to consider, but I think just looking very specifically at all of them, this is a very real question. We're starting to see a number of governments getting rid of four-year degree requirements overall. And so I would keep an eye on that trend also, because that's just going to open it up outside of folks with a very specific background or just a computer science degree too. And that's actively happening as we speak.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Is anyone producing this type of newsletter slash resource for the private sector gov tech companies?
Great question. There is Tech Jobs for Good, is kind of the place I would probably point to for that. I don't know that it's specifically GovTech, it's much more social impact, as is all tech is human, which is a little bit more in the responsible tech trust and safety space. But neither of them are specifically focused on government or government adjacent work.
Okay, thank you. Um, Give me one second. I'm reading here from chat. How many of the jobs you see are software adjacent, e.g., IT support, UX versus direct software engineering?
Um, it varies. There's a lot of direct software engineering roles, but there's a lot of other stuff happening. And actually, something that you see a lot is the kind of support side of it. Things like UX and design in particular and product are pretty new to a lot of government organizations. We're seeing it ramp up. But I would say not every jurisdiction is going to have those roles. But every jurisdiction is going to have kind of a software engineer role. It's often called like an applications developer. And as you learn a little bit more, particularly in smaller jurisdictions, or in different agencies, you can kind of get a sense from how they write about it or what they have done publicly, if there's an opportunity to kind of influence through roles like that. So going into something where everybody's bought in, or going into something where you have an opportunity to help shape what that looks like. We're also seeing a lot of tech leadership type roles right now as well. But the other thing I would say, if you look at, especially like I have a section and kind of lumped together program management, project management, and product. And part of that's because you could see a lot of those types of things that are called like project manager roles in government and kind of a tech adjacent space have the opportunity to bring principles of product management in it and really transform what's possible. The titles are still kind of catching up with really what the opportunity is.
Okay, thank you. Um, Before asking the next question, we had one that's just a comment, not a question, but just saying thanks, capital letters, because I have been able to find tech postings in other cities because of your job board. Without it, it would be so time consuming to find these jobs. So, some appreciation in the chat there. I'll ask the next question here, which is thank you for such a great presentation. I work with a lot of undergrads. Do you ever post Gov internships? My students have been getting discouraged finding tech internships in the public sector. And then the like slanty face, or I don't know how to say it, but like with the slash and the it's like yeah.
Yeah. I don't always post internships, but it's been a question. And there are tech internships out there actually, and I can make a post about some of them. There's a bunch of hiring actually happening right now at the federal level for internships for this upcoming summer that I would encourage folks to take a look at. I think the federal government has like an internship specific page, but I've seen tech and program management roles and a whole variety of other things. And so that's an opportunity. And I think some of them are remote and some of them are probably DC based, but I'd have to look specifically. The other thing, actually, the Transit Authority has a strong internship program that I would look. They have a number of both summer and year-long internships listed right now in the Chicago area that I noted when I was taking a look at what they're doing. And so that's a great opportunity as well. And there's some really interesting work going on at both CTA and also transit authorities across the country.
Okay. I think so. The next question is anything you've learned while creating the newsletter that surprised you? Any trends that you weren't aware of that you noticed or things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing that I think this is very specific to my experience, and some of the folks I know here, but it's been fascinating to see which cities are lagging behind. Someone asked about salary and pay. In New York City, for instance, is actually probably some of the most underpaid at the government staff level in the country, and definitely compared to cost of living. And I think I've been hearing about that type of awareness really opening up the conversations in a lot of places, which I think has been really interesting to see just what awareness and openness and transparency brings when it's kind of in people's faces. Um, I think also, I mean, it's been great to see how much it's resonated with folks. I came through my career kind of starting in government because of the field I was in when I started in transportation and transit, which is primarily a government field. And so it's been fascinating to meet folks from all different backgrounds and sectors and really think about kind of what's drawing people to this. Why are they interested in this right now? And what are the opportunities out there? And just seeing how helpful something that started as something I just had awareness of, but not everybody does, is able to really just provide what I think is a helpful service.
All right. Well, I think that brings us to a close here. I just want to say thank you so much for the presentation, and uh, we can link to anything subsequently in the chat.
Great.
Um, but yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thank you all. Thank you, Shy Hack Night. I'll put this up and we can figure out, Cameron, maybe how to get these, but there's some great just opportunities and things depending on what you're looking for that I will leave you with. But thank you so much. And please feel free, uh, give the job board a follow. If you have feedback, please let me know. If there's questions too, my LinkedIn message box is open, and I welcome questions. So thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you. And so I think I'm waiting for some slides here that Kyle will put up. And just a reminder for folks that we're about to have the post presentation Zoom call where we'll do our 3-word introductions, breakout groups, and the like. So you can find that linked here. Um, and so with that, we'll bring things to a close and we'll look forward to seeing folks in the post presentation call. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night. Be careful with the storm out there.